Have you ever wondered how people from ancient times prepared for bed when there were no pillows as we know them, no mattresses filled with springs, when candles flickered faintly in mud-walled homes, when dreams were believed to be messages? What did it mean to fall asleep in the time of the pharaohs, or in a Roman villa, or in a thatched Celtic hut? Tonight let us close our eyes and slowly drift back through quiet centuries to gently explore how ancient people slept. Welcome to Ancient Afterglow. This is a space for calm, unhurried history. Here, we read through time, slowly, gently, without drama or urgency. If you are ready, allow your body to settle, your breathing to soften, and let the steady rhythm of the past lull you into sleep. Tonight's journey is titled Boring History for Sleep: How Ancient People Slept. We'll explore the ways in which ancient civilizations approached rest, sleep, and the long stillness of night. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin. Have you ever found yourself lying awake in the stillness of night, wondering how ancient people might have prepared for their own rest, what rituals they performed, what beliefs they carried with them into sleep, and what objects surrounded them as they drifted into the quiet world of dreams? Across long-forgotten centuries, in the flicker of oil lamps and beneath ceilings made of reed, stone, or woven branch, sleep was approached not as a luxury, but as a natural necessity shaped by culture, custom, and the slow passage of time. In the earliest civilizations known to history, the concept of sleep was often viewed through a spiritual or symbolic lens. Written records from ancient Mesopotamia, considered by many to be the cradle of civilization, contain only sparse references to sleeping practices, but dreams are given a prominent role in surviving tablets. The Epic of Gilgamesh, composed more than 4,000 years ago, speaks of troubled sleep and sleepless nights as markers of inner turmoil. In that tale, Gilgamesh, the king, mourns the loss of his friend and finds no peace in slumber. To the Mesopotamians, dreams were not simply mental images or random occurrences. They were seen as messages from the gods, delivered to humans in moments of vulnerability. The temples of Sumer and Akkad were spaces not only for worship, but also for divination, and many people sought answers from priests who specialized in interpreting dreams. These interpreters sometimes recorded dream types and outcomes on clay tablets, forming the earliest examples of what we might now think of as dream dictionaries. But sleep itself, how long it lasted, where people lay, whether they shared sleeping quarters, is more elusive in the written record. And so we must piece together these nightly traditions from archaeology, art, and comparative ethnography, always speaking softly about things never loudly declared. As we drift further along the historical river, ancient Egypt offers its own quiet insights into the world of sleep. Egyptians believed that sleep was a time when the soul left the body temporarily, traveling into the realms of gods and spirits. This belief was mirrored in their understanding of death, which they called the eternal sleep. The god of sleep, known as Seshmu, or sometimes Bes, was associated with protection and warding off evil. Amulets and small carved figures representing protective deities were often placed near the head or on the body of a sleeping person. Beds were often elevated wooden frames with headrests made of curved stone or wood. These were not pillows in the modern sense, but supports to cradle the neck and keep hairstyles intact. Many wealthier Egyptians used linen sheets and mosquito nets, particularly in areas near the Nile where insects were plentiful. The homes of ordinary people, on the other hand, might have included sleeping mats laid on packed earth or on low platforms made of woven reed or palm. Children often slept close to parents. Night was a time not only of rest, but also of caution. The desert was filled with the sound of nocturnal animals. The flicker of oil lamps cast long shadows. To close one's eyes was to place trust in the world, remaining still until morning. In ancient Greece, the slow philosophical consideration of sleep emerged in texts by Plato and Aristotle. They examined its causes, its effects, and its connection to the body and the soul. Sleep was considered one of the necessary rhythms of life. It was balanced between wakefulness and death, and dreams were often considered prophetic or diagnostic. The Greeks identified Hypnos as the god of sleep. He was depicted as a gentle figure with wings on his shoulders or near his temples, moving silently across the earth and bringing rest to humans. He was said to live in a dark cave near the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, where the sun never shone and the only sound was the trickling of water and the whisper of poppy fields. Hypnos was the twin of Thanatos, the personification of death. Their close relationship symbolized the boundary between temporary and permanent departure from the world of the living. When sleep came peacefully, it was a gift. When it came unexpectedly or was unshakable, it could indicate illness or divine intervention. Greeks, especially in rural areas, would end their day with small, habitual rituals, washing the feet, reciting hymns, or eating small meals thought to promote rest. Though details of these habits vary, the emphasis on preparing for sleep shows that even then, nightfall was not simply a biological occurrence. It was something to be gently acknowledged. Moving eastward, ancient China held its own deeply layered understanding of sleep. Within Taoist and Confucian texts, the act of sleeping was seen as an alignment with the natural order, a harmonization with the flow of energy in the universe, known as qi. Daytime activity was associated with yang, light, movement, and heat. Nighttime, and by extension sleep, was associated with yin, darkness, stillness, and coolness. The balance between these two forces was essential for health, and many practices centered on encouraging this balance. Sleeping positions were even prescribed in medical texts. It was believed that lying on one's right side aided digestion and prevented nightmares. Beds in ancient Chinese households varied depending on status. The wealthiest families slept on elevated wooden beds with carved panels and thin mattresses stuffed with cotton, wool, or straw. In colder climates, sleeping platforms were sometimes heated by braziers or internal flues. Curtains might surround the bed, not only for privacy, but also to create a cocoon of warmth and protection. People in less affluent households might sleep on woven mats or wooden benches with folded garments serving as pillows. Dreams, like in other ancient societies, were considered meaningful. Dream interpretation manuals existed, offering guidance on whether a dream portended fortune, illness, or impending decisions. Sleep was a continuation of life's subtle energies, never something to be ignored. In the Indian subcontinent, the Vedic traditions described sleep as one of the natural urges of the body. In Sanskrit, sleep is called nidra, and it was seen not as a weakness or indulgence, but a requirement for clarity, balance, and health. The ancient Indian system of Ayurveda spoke extensively about sleep. It emphasized the importance of a regular sleep schedule, especially going to bed shortly after dusk and waking before sunrise. Improper sleep, according to these texts, could lead to imbalance in the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, each of which governed different bodily functions and temperaments. Resting in alignment with the sun and moon was believed to restore harmony within the body. In Indian homes, sleeping arrangements were communal, particularly in earlier times. Entire families often slept in the same room or space, typically on the floor using cotton-stuffed mattresses or mats. The concept of a separate bedroom was rare. People slept with their heads pointing either east or south, as other directions were thought to attract negative energy. Oil lamps were extinguished, and sometimes sacred mantras were whispered before lying down. In villages, the night air carried the faint smell of ghee, smoke from cooking fires, and the rustle of leaves stirred by warm breezes. In this setting, sleep was not something sought with urgency, but something allowed to arrive gently. Turning toward the Americas, pre-Columbian civilizations such as the Maya and Inca also had their own unique relationship with sleep, though surviving records are limited. In Mayan culture, it appears that sleep had a connection with the spiritual world. Shamans would often enter sleep-like trances to communicate with deities or receive visions. For ordinary people, sleep likely took place in simple stone or adobe homes with reed mats and blankets made of woven fiber. The night was marked by the rhythmic chirp of insects, and in highland regions, temperatures dropped sharply, requiring the use of thick textiles or fur. Similar to other ancient cultures, the act of sleeping was interwoven with the practical, the symbolic, and the spiritual. Even in places where records are almost entirely absent, such as in some nomadic or oral societies, the universality of sleep suggests its importance was recognized. Archaeological remains show areas of dwellings that were likely used for rest. In some indigenous Arctic communities, people slept in insulated snow houses with fur-lined sleeping platforms. In sub-Saharan Africa, archaeological and anthropological evidence indicates that people slept communally, often in circular homes around a central hearth. Sleep was communal, often shared, and closely tied to warmth, security, and environmental adaptation. From these scattered but overlapping glimpses, we can begin to understand that while the act of sleeping is universal, the ways people approached it, where they slept, when they slept, what they believed happened during sleep, varied greatly across cultures and time periods. What remains consistent is the idea that sleep was more than just a pause in activity. It was a period set apart, often approached with preparation, reverence, or caution. As we drift now from this historical background into the daily routines and rhythms that shaped ancient sleeping habits, we move without hurry. We continue to listen to the soft pulse of the past, stepping quietly over stone floors, through reed-covered huts, along worn paths that led people back to rest. Sleep, then as now, waited at the end of every long day, arriving softly as the world grew still. As the sun dipped beneath distant hills and shadows grew longer over fields, city walls, and stone-paved courtyards, ancient people began their slow retreat from the activities of the day. The pattern of sleep, when it began, how long it lasted, and how it was arranged, was closely tied to the natural world and the rhythms of daily labor, climate, and season. Without the hum of electric light, without alarms or midnight entertainment, sleep came gradually, shaped by the glow of twilight and the quiet wind that moved through open windows, reeds, or wooden shutters. In much of the ancient world, the division between day and night was marked by the movement of the sun. With no reliable artificial lighting beyond the flicker of oil lamps, people typically rose with the dawn and returned to rest not long after darkness settled. This alignment with nature's rhythm meant that sleep was often earlier than today, but it was not always a single block of uninterrupted hours. In many ancient cultures, sleep followed a biphasic pattern, two distinct phases separated by a period of quiet wakefulness. The first sleep, sometimes referred to in historical sources as first sleep, began not long after nightfall. This early sleep might last 4 or 5 hours. Then came a period of wakefulness, lasting perhaps 1 or 2 hours. During this quiet interlude, people sometimes prayed, reflected, mended clothes, or even visited neighbors. It was a time of stillness, but not necessarily sleep. Some medical texts from the medieval period refer to this wakeful window as the best time for conception, for thinking clearly, or for spiritual activity. Afterward, the second sleep would carry the person through to the pale light of morning. This segmented pattern of rest may have been common across many ancient and pre-industrial societies, though not all. In warmer climates where the sun was strong, such as in the Mediterranean, a midday rest was also customary. The siesta, though we think of it now as a Spanish tradition, has roots in earlier habits practiced in regions where the afternoon heat made physical labor difficult. In such settings, a short nap after the midday meal provided refreshment and balance, especially for those engaged in farming or outdoor labor. Daily work dictated much about how and when people slept. Farmers rose before the sun to water fields, tend animals, and begin planting. Artisans opened workshops early using daylight hours for tasks requiring vision and detail. In the marketplaces of Athens, vendors began setting up stalls just after dawn. In ancient Mesopotamia, records show that workers were often paid based on the sun's position, labor timed with shadows rather than clocks. As daylight faded, homes gradually became quiet. Meals were taken in the late afternoon or early evening, usually simple and small, often consisting of grains, pulses, or flatbreads, sometimes with preserved vegetables or dried fruits. Heavy meals late at night were generally avoided, as they were thought to disturb the body and dreams alike. In Roman households, the schedule was similar. The day began at first light, especially for those in the lower classes who labored in shops, fields, or construction. The wealthy might rise slightly later, attended by servants. After work, meals, bathing, and socializing, sleep arrived around the 9th or 10th hour after dawn, equivalent to mid or late evening. In some cases, naps were also taken during the afternoon in shaded courtyards or on reclining couches known as lecti. Within households, sleep arrangements varied. The family unit often shared sleeping quarters, especially among those of modest means. In a small house, there might be a single room used for eating, sleeping, and working, with mats unrolled in the evening and stored again each morning. Children might sleep beside parents or grandparents. In wealthier homes, dedicated sleeping chambers existed, sometimes with separate spaces for men, women, and servants. Rooms were typically sparse, furnished with a bed frame, a chest for clothes, and perhaps a stool or bench. Light came from candles or oil lamps placed in recessed wall niches or small stands. Once extinguished, the room was left in near total darkness. In regions with cooler temperatures, sleep was influenced by the need for warmth. In Northern Europe and parts of Central Asia, shared body heat was a practical necessity. People often slept huddled together under heavy wool or fur blankets. Animals might even be brought into the home at night for warmth and security. In longhouses or communal structures, such as those used by Germanic tribes or early Slavic peoples, sleeping areas were sometimes positioned along the walls or above the central hearth. The lingering scent of smoke, combined with the quiet creaking of wooden beams and the low rustle of straw, shaped the nighttime environment. In urban centers, nighttime brought a different rhythm. Cities such as Rome, Athens, or Thebes did not fall silent immediately after sunset. Taverns remained open late, and lamps glowed along some streets, maintained by guards or night watchers. Yet even in cities, the hours after midnight grew still. People barricaded doors, latched windows, and settled into layers of cloth, straw, or woven mats. Some used bells or simple noisemakers to ward off intruders or evil spirits. Dogs roamed courtyards. Cats, useful for controlling mice, curled into corners. Among nomadic groups, sleeping patterns adapted to movement and the need for protection. In steppe societies such as the Scythians or the early Turks, sleeping occurred in tents or yurts, movable dwellings constructed from felt, hide, and wooden frames. Inside, space was divided not by walls but by customs and arrangement. Elders might sleep in the place of honor, often facing the doorway, while younger members and servants rested near the sides. Fires were sometimes kept burning all night in cold conditions, and watch shifts were shared among men to protect against wild animals or rival tribes. Sleep, for these communities, was lighter, alert, and often accompanied by ritual. In East Asia, particularly in ancient China and Japan, daily life was shaped around Confucian or agrarian schedules. In farming villages, people followed the seasons strictly. During planting and harvesting, sleep was shortened. During the colder months, it was lengthened. In Japanese homes, futons were laid out each evening on tatami floors and folded away during the day. This practice created space efficiency, but also established a clear rhythm. Work during the day, restore the body by night. Families typically shared rooms, especially in earlier periods. The arrangement of bodies in sleep followed family hierarchy. Elders closest to warmth or doorways children between parents, younger members near the walls. In India, similar patterns were observed. The working day began early, especially in rural communities. Tasks such as drawing water, feeding livestock, or grinding grain were started before dawn. Sleep came soon after dinner, which often concluded by sunset. Without electricity and relying on flickering oil lamps, activity slowed quickly after dark. Many homes in villages had open courtyards where people gathered before bed. Mats were spread, and sleep occurred either in shared rooms or under the stars in the warm months. In colder regions, people slept in huddled rooms with heavy wool blankets and earthen stoves radiating heat through the night. Among desert communities in Arabia and North Africa, sleep was responsive to temperature. In the hottest months, daytime movement was minimal, and much activity occurred at dusk and dawn. Sleep was often divided, with a longer rest taken after nightfall and shorter naps during the day. Bedouin tents were designed to regulate airflow and provide shade, but they offered little insulation. Nights could grow cold, requiring additional layers of cloth and shared space to retain heat. Here, too, sleep was not only biological, it was strategic. Across these diverse societies, we see a consistent pattern. Sleep mirrored the practicalities of daily labor, the environmental conditions, and cultural expectations. It was not treated identically everywhere, but it was always present. The need to rest, to close the eyes, to disengage from activity, to allow the body to be still, was acknowledged in every way of life, whether under tiled roofs or beneath canvas and sky. There was also the question of how long people slept. Estimates vary, but it is likely that most ancient people did not sleep more than 6 to 8 hours in total, especially when segmented into 2 phases. Children and the elderly may have slept more, while laborers sometimes slept less. Sleep deprivation was not unknown, but it was experienced differently. Without artificial light, people often went to bed earlier. Without alarm clocks, they woke naturally with light or sound. There were no glowing screens to keep them awake. There were no long commutes or late-night obligations. Still, the stress of survival, of harvests, wars, taxes, illness, could disturb rest, just as it does today. What differs most from modern life is not necessarily how people slept, but how sleep fit into a broader rhythm. It was not extracted from time, but woven into it. It was not a break from the day, but a gentle passage through it. The space between day and night was marked by small rituals, quiet conversation, preparation of bedding, slow dimming of lamps, sometimes a prayer or chant. These transitions mattered because they allowed the mind to follow the body gently. As we prepare to explore how people enhanced their rest with customs, protections, and small rituals, we pause here briefly. The world has dimmed. The fields are still. The hearths are low. People have returned from work, removed their sandals, wrapped themselves in cloth or hide, and now, slowly they begin to fade into the silence of sleep. The long day has ended, and the night has taken its place. As the pale glow of dusk settled over ancient landscapes, sleep did not arrive all at once. It came gradually, invited by custom, assisted by familiar patterns, and accompanied by the soft rituals of tradition. These nightly routines varied from place to place, shaped by religion, culture, geography, and family structure. And yet, the intention was often the same: to prepare the body for stillness, to calm the mind, and to create a boundary between the activities of the day and the long hush of night. In the homes of ancient Egypt, where the air was dry and the wind carried the scent of sand and Nile reeds, the process of winding down was marked by quiet actions. Small oil lamps were refilled, linen coverings adjusted, and amulets placed carefully on bedside stands or beneath the sleeping surface. These amulets often bore the likeness of Bes, a dwarf-like protective deity, believed to guard against bad dreams and malevolent spirits. Inscriptions and carvings found on tomb walls and domestic artifacts suggest that sleep, though common, was not taken lightly. It was a passage into another realm, and the sleeper was gently prepared as one might prepare for a journey. Some people whispered invocations to the gods for protection during the hours of darkness. Others used charms, crafted from stone or faience, inscribed with hieroglyphs, meant to ward off the unseen. The beds themselves reflected more than comfort. They carried symbolic meaning. Elevated wooden frames allowed airflow in warmer climates, and sleeping slightly above the earth was thought to offer protection from insects and spirits that might dwell below. Headrests, curved supports made from ivory, wood, or stone, lifted the head in alignment with the rising sun. These were not intended for softness, but for stability, for ritual, and for belief. In certain tombs, models of beds and sleeping figures were included as part of burial goods, suggesting that rest was considered essential, not just in life, but in the afterlife as well. Further east, in the Indian subcontinent, sleep preparation often took on a spiritual dimension rooted in the teachings of the Vedas and the principles of Ayurveda. Before lying down, some households followed a simple routine: washing the feet with cool water, reciting verses or mantras, lighting a small diya lamp, and sometimes applying fragrant oils to the scalp or temples. These actions were believed to calm the senses, balance the energies of the body, and allow one to enter sleep with a clear mind. According to ancient Ayurvedic texts, the best sleep occurred when the body was clean, the stomach was not too full, and the mind was free from anger or anxiety. Individuals were advised to avoid violent or disturbing stories before bedtime. Instead, they were encouraged to speak softly, to reflect on gratitude, and to sleep in a position that aligned the head with the east or south, directions believed to enhance vitality and peace. In many households, a tulsi plant, considered sacred, was kept near the home, and the scent of incense drifted through rooms as part of the evening ritual. In joint family homes, elders might lead a brief prayer or song known as a bhajan before sleep. Children learned these routines by repetition, the gentle rhythms of tradition passed down not through instruction, but through quiet imitation. Night after night, these small rituals shaped the passage into rest, making sleep not only necessary, but sacred. Among the ancient Greeks, daily life was intertwined with thought, with philosophy, and with the many deities that governed human behavior. Sleep, personified by Hypnos, was not a chaotic event, but an expected visitor. Some Greeks believed that sleep was a temporary death, and as such, they approached it with care. Before retiring, individuals often performed ablutions, washing the feet or face with cool water, sometimes anointing the skin with olive oil. In more affluent homes, servants assisted with these tasks. The oil not only cleansed and soothed the skin, but also carried symbolic meaning, representing purification and readiness for rest. Plato, in his philosophical works, advised moderation in all things, including food and rest. He suggested that overeating or excessive stimulation before bed led to troubled sleep and unquiet dreams. Aristotle wrote on sleep in his works on biology, noting that digestion and warmth played roles in the induction of sleep. He believed that sleep arose from the heart and was connected to internal warmth, moving inward after the body cooled externally. These ideas, though speculative, influenced the way people prepared for bed. Light evening meals, calming activities, and a general slowing down of the body and breath. Household gods such as Hestia were sometimes honored in evening rituals. A final offering of food, a libation of wine, or the lighting of a small flame at the hearth connected the family with divine protection through the night. In rural homes, people might share stories around the fire, speaking in low tones. Children were lulled to sleep with tales of myth and caution. Sleep was not rushed. It arrived on its own schedule, and it was welcomed with respect. In Rome, similar traditions evolved with variations shaped by the empire's cosmopolitan reach. The domestic gods, known as Lares and Penates, were given offerings before sleep. Small statues of these guardians were placed in niches or near the kitchen, and families often paused in front of them in the evening. Bedtime rituals included changes of clothing, removing the day's tunic and donning a lighter sleep garment, and arranging the sleeping area with fresh cloths or cushions if available. Some Roman medical writers recommended the use of wine before bed, though others warned against overindulgence. Warm baths were common among the wealthy, taken at the end of the day to prepare the body for rest. In lower-class housing, the rituals were simpler, extinguishing the lamp, locking the door, placing a small charm or religious token under the pillow, and lying down with minimal ceremony. But even in simplicity, the gesture was present. The act of moving from day into night was not taken for granted. In ancient China, particularly during the Han and Tang dynasties, the transition to sleep was often accompanied by specific rituals intended to harmonize the energies of the body. Traditional Chinese medicine viewed sleep as essential to the balance of qi. Practitioners advised that the bedroom be kept clean, quiet, and oriented according to principles of feng shui. The direction of the bed, the placement of windows, and even the color of textiles played roles in promoting restful energy. Silk bedclothes, if available, were considered both luxurious and healthful. Evening activities were designed to quiet the spirit. Calligraphy, tea drinking, or the playing of stringed instruments, such as the guqin, were practiced in soft lighting. Candles burned low. Poetry was sometimes read aloud. It was believed that agitation or strong emotions could disturb not only sleep, but also the body's long-term health. Therefore, arguments were discouraged in the evening hours. Parents taught children to approach the night calmly, to lie down with folded hands, and to breathe slowly through the nose. Some used porcelain or wooden pillows, not for comfort, but for spinal alignment and mental clarity. In this culture, as in others, the night was not empty. It was full of silent presence. Among the Japanese, particularly in early periods such as the Heian era, sleep preparation followed customs rooted in simplicity and seasonal awareness. Beds were not fixed furnishings, but arrangements made fresh each night. Futons were unrolled on tatami mats, aired during the day, and restored before bedtime. The process of preparing the sleeping area was methodical and slow. Shoji screens were closed to block moonlight or wind. In colder months, charcoal braziers were placed nearby. Evening meals were light, often including rice, miso, and pickled vegetables. After dinner, some families observed quiet time, writing, chanting sutras, or listening to the sounds of nature through paper walls. Buddhist influence encouraged detachment, even in sleep. Monks were trained to sleep lightly, on firm surfaces, often with minimal covering. Their rituals before sleep included reciting sutras and meditating. The transition to sleep was not seen as escape, but as part of mindfulness. In this mindset, each action, even resting the head, was done with intention. Silence was not merely absence of noise, but a cultivated stillness. In the indigenous cultures of the Americas, sleep traditions were tied closely to the cycles of the earth. Among the Maya, the arrival of night marked a time when the spirit moved freely between worlds. Priests and shamans often slept in sacred enclosures, using specific plants or smoke to induce visions or dreams. Rituals included smudging the body or sleeping space with copal or sage. In households, families might gather before sleep to share oral traditions, stories, warnings, lessons. The cadence of storytelling itself acted as a lullaby, its repetition as comforting as a blanket. In Andean regions, rituals related to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, included thanking the land for another day. Offerings were sometimes made at dusk, buried near the doorstep or left on stone altars. Sleep was viewed as returning to the earth, and the physical positioning of the sleeper, sometimes oriented toward mountains or rivers, was believed to influence the quality of dreams and rest. Blankets were woven thick, designed to withstand the cold air of high elevations. The body was wrapped, the spirit protected. In desert regions of North Africa and Arabia, sleep rituals addressed the challenges of temperature and exposure. Before bed, people might drink water, adjust tent flaps, check the stars. Small leather pouches containing verses from the Quran were hung above beds or tied around the wrist. Bedtime prayers offered protection from jinn or misfortune. Among the Tuareg and Berber peoples, the arrangement of sleeping spaces followed patterns of age and lineage. Storytelling and song marked the close of the day, the familiar voices echoing softly across sand and silence. Though distant in time and place, all these traditions echo a simple truth. Sleep was not entered casually. It was approached. It was prepared for, whether with prayer or gesture, with oils or incantations, with stories or songs. People made room for rest. They quieted the world around them, and they quieted themselves. And in doing so, they allowed sleep to come as it wished, gently, slowly, and without force. As we continue this journey, we carry these soft echoes with us, the scent of lamps, the hush of prayer, the steady folding of cloth. We leave behind the rituals of rest and move onward, calmly, into the spaces where sleep met the physical world, the tools, the beds, and the resting places people shaped for themselves as night fell again and again for thousands of years. As the body grows still and the world darkens, the space where sleep occurs becomes important. The surface beneath the sleeper, the cloth that surrounds them, the texture of what touches skin, and the arrangement of limbs in the stillness of night, all of these elements shaped the sleep of ancient people. Though these details might seem minor to the waking mind, they mattered deeply in the quiet hours after light had gone, when breath slowed, and the only sound might be the shifting of fabric, the faint creak of a frame, or the distant call of night animals beyond the walls. Across continents and centuries, the spaces people created for rest reveal much about what comfort meant, what materials were available, and how the physical body was prepared to surrender to sleep. In the river valley civilizations, where early cities rose from soil rich with silt and stone, sleeping surfaces were often simple. In ancient Mesopotamia, homes were constructed from mud brick, and the sleeping area was frequently located in the coolest, most ventilated part of the house, often on the roof during the summer, or within an interior space during the colder months. Clay tablets rarely describe beds, but archaeological evidence suggests that mats woven from reeds or palm fibers were used by ordinary people. These mats were portable and could be rolled up each morning, keeping the living space flexible. For those of greater means, beds were wooden structures with rope or reed lattices stretched across a frame, over which fabric or animal hides might be laid. Pillows were often small cushions, filled with wool or fiber, though some used curved wooden headrests, similar to those found in Egypt. In Egypt, where burial sites have preserved furniture and household items with remarkable detail, beds were more refined among the elite. Wooden bed frames, often intricately carved, were slightly elevated from the ground and sloped downward, with the head placed higher than the feet. This was both a practical and symbolic design. Practically, it allowed airflow and helped reduce contact with pests. Symbolically, sleeping with the head elevated and aligned with the rising sun echoes spiritual beliefs about life and rebirth. Headrests were used instead of pillows, designed as a single piece of wood or stone, gently curved to cradle the neck. These were not designed for softness, but for posture, maintaining the hairstyle or ceremonial form of the sleeper. Beds might be painted, inlaid with ivory, or decorated with motifs of protection, such as the Eye of Horus or the symbol of Anubis, guardian of sleep and death. Linen sheets, especially among wealthier households, were favored for their softness and breathability. For common people, woven straw or bundled plant fiber served as bedding, layered beneath thin cloth coverings. In ancient Greece, the clean was a multi-purpose piece of furniture, used both for reclining during meals and for sleeping. This couch-like bed featured a wooden frame with a slightly slanted surface, supported by legs and often decorated with carved or painted details. Over the frame, leather or fabric webbing created a surface for sleeping, topped with mattresses filled with wool, straw, or feathers. depending on what a household could afford. Sheets and blankets were woven from wool or linen. People generally slept in a simple garment or unclothed, depending on the season. In colder months, heavier cloaks served as blankets, while during summer, thinner coverings were sufficient. The mattress itself might be soft, but not plush. The idea of extreme softness was not common. Sleep was about restoration, not indulgence, and excessive comfort was sometimes viewed with suspicion. The Romans, inheriting and expanding Greek traditions, developed a range of sleeping arrangements. The lectus was the Roman bed, often placed in a separate sleeping room if space allowed. For the wealthy, these beds were built from bronze or wood, sometimes gilded, and featured carved headboards or posts. The mattress was a large sack filled with wool, feathers, or sometimes hay, depending on the quality desired. Beds were topped with layers of cloth, bottom sheets, lighter upper sheets, and thick woolen blankets or animal hides in winter. Pillows were used, often made of fabric, filled with down or other soft materials. In many homes, slaves prepared the beds each night, smoothing sheets, folding blankets, and lighting small oil lamps. Those without servants performed these tasks themselves, slowly, in preparation for the stillness to come. For poorer citizens, sleep occurred on mats, benches, or even straw directly on the floor. The appearance of the sleeper, how they dressed, or whether they changed garments for bed, was often determined by social class, weather, and cultural attitudes. In Roman times, the tunica or undergarment worn during the day might be removed and replaced with a lighter sleeping tunic, especially in wealthier homes. Among laborers and in rural areas, people frequently slept in their daily clothing, conserving warmth and reducing the need for additional garments. Cleanliness before bed was ideal, but not always possible. A basic washing of the face, feet, and hands was common, particularly among those who valued ritual purity or personal discipline. In the East, similar distinctions emerged. In China, beds were often built as raised wooden platforms, sometimes enclosed by screens or drapes for privacy and warmth. These beds, known as kongs in northern regions, could be heated from below by flues connected to a stove. A person might sleep on a thin mattress, placed over the warm stone or clay surface, wrapped in quilts made of silk, cotton, or wool. Quilts were sometimes elaborately embroidered, not only for beauty, but also to symbolize prosperity, fertility, or health. Families that could afford it stored seasonal bedding, rotating lighter and heavier materials as the year progressed. In smaller homes, everyone slept in a shared space, and warmth was managed communally. Children might be placed between adults, and elders given the warmest positions. Robes or sleeping garments made of silk were desirable but expensive. Most people used cotton or hemp clothing, sometimes worn day and night. In Japan, especially during the Nara and Heian periods, sleep took place on the floor using futon-style bedding, layers of fabric laid on woven tatami mats. During the day, these items were folded and stored in cabinets, allowing the space to be used for other purposes. The futon system allowed for easy adaptation to weather, with multiple quilts added during winter. Sleeping garments were loose and unstructured, resembling modern yukata or kosore. These were tied simply, easy to remove and fold. Simplicity was part of the aesthetic and spiritual philosophy, especially among those influenced by Buddhist teachings. In monastic settings, monks slept on firm mats or wooden platforms covered with a single cloth, using their folded robes as pillows. Comfort was not the goal. Awareness and discipline were. In South Asia, beds ranged from rope-woven charpoys to floor mats, depending on region and economic status. The charpoy was a lightweight, portable bed with a wooden frame and jute or cotton ropes woven tightly to create a firm but breathable surface. These beds could be moved easily outdoors during hot weather, allowing people to sleep beneath the stars. In rural communities, entire families might sleep side by side, with older members rising earlier and preparing morning fires before the others stirred. Garments were adjusted for comfort and modesty. A simple dhoti, lungi, or night tunic, clean cloth was valued, And when possible, people changed before sleeping, particularly after bathing at sunset or early evening. In colder climates, sleeping arrangements reflected the need to preserve heat. In medieval Scandinavia, for instance, people often slept in box beds, wooden enclosures with sliding doors or heavy curtains that retained warmth and protected against drafts. Inside, hay, straw, or wool was layered beneath cloth, and fur blankets or pelts added further insulation. People slept in shifts, and sleeping in one's clothing was common. Garments made of wool or layered linen served as both daywear and nightwear. Caps and mittens were sometimes worn to bed, especially during long winters. Fires were left to smolder in hearths, and beds were placed as close to the heat source as safely possible. In nomadic societies, such as the Mongols or Turkic steppe cultures, sleeping arrangements had to be mobile. Felt-lined yurts provided insulation and structure. Bedrolls consisted of wool blankets, animal hides, and woven mats, stacked for warmth and comfort. Sleeping platforms were placed opposite the entrance, with symbolic importance assigned to different sides. The head of the family occupied the most honored sleeping space, and guests were shown respect through careful arrangement of their bedding. Pillows, if used, were simple sacks filled with wool or soft grass. During migration, these items were rolled and tied to pack animals. Their portability was essential, yet their construction reflected a deep understanding of material and need. Among indigenous peoples of the Americas, sleep also took place in harmony with nature. In the longhouses of the Iroquois, for example, platforms lined the walls, each serving as a sleeping area for a family unit. Bedding included bark mats, fur, and woven blankets. In the warmer climates of Central and South America, hammocks were widely used, suspended from walls or trees, made from woven cotton or plant fiber. These allowed airflow, kept sleepers off the ground, and could be rolled or tied when not in use. Hammocks also offered safety from insects and were often used with mosquito netting. Sleeping garments were minimal due to climate, and decorative cloths sometimes doubled as both dress and blanket. The concept of privacy in sleep, as we understand it today, was less prevalent in most ancient contexts. Families shared space, noise, movement, and conversation occurred in the same room. Sleep, like other aspects of life, was collective, shared, and adjusted as needed. The shape of the bed, the material of the sheets, and the type of clothing all reflected larger realities of labor, status, and survival. In this quiet observation, we find that sleep was never only about closing the eyes. It was a total experience of body and environment, a blend of fabric, wood, animal hair, and human presence. Whether on carved beds or simple mats, whether alone or surrounded by others, ancient people sought the same release: to be still, to restore, and to let the night pass gently through them. And so we move forward, leaving behind these quiet spaces, these bundles of cloth and shadow. We turn now, without hurry, to the beliefs people carried with them into dreams, the hopes, fears, and symbols that lived in the world of sleep. For the night was never truly empty. It was filled with meanings, seen and unseen. As night deepened across the ancient world and people folded themselves into cloth and shadow, sleep was not merely a physical act. It was something more, something older than memory, something that felt mysterious, even sacred. Sleep was a place, a space where the waking world blurred into something less certain, less predictable, and more porous. In that fragile boundary between day and night, belief took root. Stories emerged, superstitions formed, and cultures began to build meaning around the quiet vulnerability of the sleeping body and the drifting soul. Among the ancient Egyptians, sleep was linked closely with the soul's journey. They believed that during rest, part of the soul, known as the Ba, left the body and traveled through unseen realms, returning before the dreamer awoke. This belief shaped the way sleep was understood. It was not simply unconsciousness, but a temporary release of the spirit. If one failed to wake, it meant the Ba had not returned. Because of this, many people feared sudden death in sleep, and prayers were whispered as the night approached. Protective amulets were placed near beds, invoking the guardianship of deities like Bes or Taweret, who warded off nightmares and harmful spirits. It was believed that demons could visit in dreams or slip into the room if not properly barred. Symbols carved onto bedposts or painted onto walls acted as silent sentinels. Their presence reassured the sleeper. The gods had been notified. The night might proceed in peace. In Mesopotamia, the civilizations of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon carried similar concerns. Clay tablets from that region preserved dream interpretations and incantations meant to protect against the dangers of night. The mashkim, a kind of malevolent spirit, was thought to lurk in shadows, causing disturbed sleep or illness. To combat such intrusions, charms were inscribed on clay, often in cuneiform, invoking deities such as Nergal or Enki. If a person suffered from recurring nightmares, it was believed that they might be under spiritual attack or had offended a god. Ritual cleansing might be performed. Offerings were made. Sleep, they believed, was a space of judgment, and dreams were messages, though sometimes difficult to read. Certain symbols, like rivers, animals, or falling objects, had specific interpretations. A river might mean a journey. A lion might suggest protection. A crumbling house could foretell illness or misfortune. The Greeks placed great emphasis on dreams as messages from the gods. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing, served not only as sanctuaries for the sick, but as centers of dream incubation. Patients would sleep within sacred enclosures known as abaton, hoping for a divine vision during the night. If a dream came, it might be interpreted by a priest or healer in the morning. These dreams were not simply reflections of the mind. They were taken as direct communications from higher powers. People prepared for them by fasting, bathing, and offering sacrifices. The philosopher Heraclitus once wrote that sleep brought us into touch with the Logos, the deep order of the universe. Plato believed dreams revealed hidden desires, while Aristotle saw them as natural byproducts of the body's processes. But even these thinkers acknowledged that some dreams felt different, weighted, mysterious, touched by something outside human comprehension. The Romans inherited many of these beliefs and added their own. They personified sleep as the god Somnus and dreams as the sons of Somnus, particularly Morpheus, the shaper of dream images. Roman literature is filled with references to prophetic dreams, ominous visions, and restless nights. Certain nights were considered unlucky for sleep, particularly those following major festivals or eclipses. People sometimes wore amulets inscribed with protective phrases, or hung garlic, salt, or bundles of herbs near their sleeping places. To dream of water was to face change. To see a snake might signal betrayal. The boundary between dream and omen was thin. Books known as dream manuals circulated among the educated, compiling interpretations passed down over generations. In ancient India, belief in the significance of dreams appears in early scriptures, including the Upanishad. These texts describe different states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and a fourth state beyond all others, pure awareness. Dreams were believed to be connected to karma and the subtle movements of the soul. Certain dreams were warnings, others were rewards, and some were the echo of past lives. Ayurveda, the ancient medical system, viewed disturbed sleep as a sign of imbalance in the body's energies. People who experienced frightening dreams were sometimes treated with herbal tonics, massage, or chants meant to soothe the doshas, the vital forces within the body. Priests and sages might interpret dreams, especially those that repeated or caused emotional disturbance. Nighttime was not simply rest, it was a spiritual state. In East Asia, particularly in China, the idea of dream and sleep held layered meaning. Traditional Chinese medicine taught that the spirit, the Shen, needed to be nourished for healthy sleep. Nightmares or insomnia were interpreted as signs of internal disharmony. Certain foods, such as lotus seeds or jujube fruit, were eaten in the evening to promote calmness. Dreams were divided into meaningful and meaningless categories. Prophetic dreams might be sent by ancestors who were believed to watch over their descendants. Offerings were left before sleep on special days, and dream interpretation was sometimes practiced by Taoist priests who recorded symbols and their meanings in scrolls. Some dreams were said to allow the soul to visit distant places or glimpse future events. The dreamer, while lying motionless, might cross mountains or see long-lost relatives. In elite families, special pillows filled with herbs were used to induce peaceful dreams, combining scent with belief. Certain dream images, like fish, bamboo, or stars, were welcomed. Others, such as broken objects or falling, were feared. Among the Japanese, dream beliefs drew from Shinto and Buddhist traditions. It was thought that the spirits of the deceased might communicate with the living through dreams, particularly during certain festivals like Obon. Dream dictionaries were compiled, listing common images and their implications. But beyond individual dreams, there was also a quiet reverence for sleep itself. It was treated with respect. Children were taught to lie down peacefully and to refrain from negative speech before bed, lest the energy of words carry into the night. Monks practiced dream awareness techniques, not to control the dream, but to remain conscious within it. To them, sleep was a form of meditation. Dreams, in this view, were neither random nor magical. They were teachers. In the indigenous cultures of North and South America, dreams often held central importance. Among the Ojibwe and other Algonquian-speaking peoples, the dream catcher, a woven hoop with threads resembling a spider's web, was created to protect sleepers from harmful visions. It was believed that good dreams passed through the web and slid down the feathers, while nightmares were caught and dissolved with the morning light. Stories were passed down describing spirit animals or dream journeys, where the sleeper might encounter ancestors or guiding forces. In the Andes, shamans used plants such as coca or ayahuasca to enter trance states, sometimes linked to dream exploration. Sleep and dreams were not separate from waking life, but part of an ongoing dialogue with the spiritual world. In the Middle East, particularly in early Islamic and pre-Islamic cultures, sleep and dreams were seen as a form of communication between the human soul and the divine. The Quran mentions dreams, both those of prophets and ordinary people, and emphasizes their significance. One well-known example is the dream of the prophet Joseph, which foretold future events. Dream interpretation was developed into an art and science, with scholars writing extensive commentaries on dream symbols. These texts influenced later thinkers in both the East and the West. It was believed that one could receive guidance through dreams, and therefore cleanliness, prayer, and sincerity of heart were encouraged before sleep. Some performed ritual washing or recited specific verses from the Quran to invite clarity and protection in their rest. All across the ancient world, one finds traces of the same idea, that sleep was not an empty act. It was a passage, a return, a temporary dissolution of the self into something larger, less defined and more mysterious. The vulnerability of the sleeper, eyes closed, limbs relaxed, breath slowed, created space for meaning. And meaning filled that space with stories, protections, symbols, and fears. Even the simple act of positioning the body was shaped by belief. In many cultures, sleeping with the head to the north was discouraged, thought to bring illness or invite spiritual imbalance. In others, eastward sleep aligned the body with the rising sun, a gesture of renewal. In some African traditions, children were taught to sleep near the center of the household, close to the hearth, where ancestral spirits were believed to gather. In Arctic regions, where the night could last for weeks, sleep was not merely measured in hours, but tracked through dreams, through inner cycles more than outer time. Certain dreams became legends. A king might dream of falling stars and consult an oracle. A farmer might dream of an overflowing jar and interpret it as a sign of coming harvest. A mother might dream of a serpent and worry for her children. The dream did not belong to the sleeper alone. It became a question asked of the world. As we continue through the long hush of this exploration, we hold these beliefs lightly, not to explain them away, but but to understand that sleep was never silent. It was filled with meaning, some of it fearful, some of it comforting, all of it human. We move now, without haste, into the physical tools that supported sleep, not only beds and fabrics, but lamps, locks, charms, and materials used to shape the experience of night. The objects that made the dark feel familiar, the tools that turned silence into safety. In the dim hours when day had slipped beyond the horizon, and the final colors of dusk faded into ash-gray night, the tools used by ancient people to prepare for rest began to assume their role in the rhythm of sleep. These tools were not complex in the modern sense. They had no electricity, no ticking clocks, no glowing screens. Yet each item, whether a small clay lamp, a threadbare curtain, a carved piece of wood, or a carefully shaped stone, played a quiet part in the act of turning down the world. These objects were never loud. They did not demand attention. Instead, they invited stillness. They enabled rest. And across centuries and civilizations, they carried the steady weight of repetition. In the ancient world, lighting was often the last tool used before darkness was accepted. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome, oil lamps were a common fixture in both rich and modest homes, made from terracotta, bronze, or sometimes alabaster. These lamps held a small reservoir of oil, most often olive oil or sesame, into which a linen wick was placed. The wick, once lit, provided a steady flame, small and warm, flickering gently with each shift of air. As evening approached, these lamps were kindled with care. Their flames provided the final light before sleep. In wealthier households, multiple lamps might line the walls of the sleeping chamber. In simpler dwellings, a single lamp sufficed. Its glow was familiar, consistent. The act of extinguishing it was a ritual, a quiet breath, a press of fingers, and then darkness. In that moment, the world narrowed to the shapes of cloth, the scent of earth, and the sound of one's own breath. Locks and bolts served as tools not only of security, but of peace. In the cities of Mesopotamia, doors were fitted with wooden bars, or sliding mechanisms that could be engaged from the inside. In Egypt, pivoting door bolts and rudimentary padlocks made of bronze or wood were used to secure sleeping areas, particularly in urban homes. These devices did not guarantee safety, but they offered the illusion of it, a barrier between the sleeper and the night beyond. In Roman homes, metal keys were used to lock both main entrances and individual storage spaces. Sleeping quarters, especially for the wealthy, were often separated from common areas, with doors that latched or slid into place. These closures created a boundary, however thin, between the personal world of sleep and the collective world of activity. For many, the act of locking the door was as much a mental gesture as a physical one, a sign that the day was concluded and no further interruptions were expected. Textiles also functioned as tools of sleep, shaping the sensory environment of the sleeping body. Curtains made from linen or wool were hung to partition space, to soften sound, or to block drafts. In colder regions, heavier cloth was used to line bed enclosures or insulate stone walls. Even in warmer climates, fabric was important, used to drape over doorways, to cover windows, or to hang around sleeping platforms. These curtains were not decorative in the modern sense. They were purposeful. They absorbed echoes, filtered moonlight, and created a sense of enclosure. Over time, the weaving of these fabrics became a skill passed down through generations. Patterns, thickness, and dye all varied based on region and resource. In China, silk was prized for its softness and ability to regulate temperature. In India, cotton and hemp provided breathable materials. In Northern Europe, wool was favored for its warmth. Each material had its role, its limitations, and its quiet contribution to rest. Among the most intimate tools of sleep were those that touched the skin: oils, balms, and powders applied before bed. In Egypt, scented oils were used to soften the body and calm the spirit. These oils, extracted from plants such as lotus, myrrh, or frankincense, were rubbed into the scalp or temples. Some were applied to the soles of the feet or behind the ears. Their aroma was believed to purify, to heal, and to protect. In Greece and Rome, Similar practices existed. Olive oil, often infused with herbs like lavender, marjoram, or rosemary, was used after bathing to moisturize and relax the body. These oils were not merely cosmetic, they were thought to have medicinal properties. In Ayurvedic medicine, sesame oil was used in nightly massage rituals known as abhyanga, designed to pacify the nervous system and prepare the body for sleep. Warmed slightly, the oil was applied in long strokes, beginning at the scalp and ending at the soles of the feet. This act was slow, repetitive, and calming, often performed in silence. Aromatics played another role, shaping the invisible landscape of sleep through scent. In many homes, incense was burned during the hours before bed. In China, coils of incense were hung near windows, their smoke curling upward in slow spirals. In India, sandalwood, camphor, and benzoin resin were common. In Japan, powdered incense was pressed into delicate cones and lit in quiet ceremony. These scents were not overpowering. They drifted slowly, filling the room with a presence that marked the end of activity. Even among nomadic cultures, burning herbs or dried leaves created an olfactory boundary between the day's toil and the approaching quiet. Charms and amulets formed a different category of tool, one more symbolic than functional, and yet just as important to the people who placed them by the bed. In Egyptian tombs, small figures known as ushabti were buried beside the deceased to serve them in the afterlife. Among the living, similar charms were used to protect sleepers. The Eye of Horus was a common symbol representing health, protection, and restoration. It was painted onto headboards or carved into small beads. In Greece, the evil eye was warded off with blue stones or amulets shaped like hands. In Mesopotamia, clay plaques with depictions of protective deities were buried under doorways or placed on walls. These items were not questioned. Their presence was accepted, much like the presence of night itself. Other tools were purely practical. In colder climates, stone warmers, flat stones heated in the fire, were wrapped in cloth and placed at the foot of the bed. In Roman homes, metal bed warmers filled with hot coals were used to heat mattresses before sleeping. In China, clay pots filled with embers served a similar purpose. These items were carried carefully, placed with caution, and removed before sleep deepened. The goal was to take the edge off the cold, not to create lasting heat, but to invite a brief softness into the bedding. The smell of smoke, the warmth of fabric, and the slight hiss of cooling stone all contributed to the sensory descent into sleep. Sound, or the control of it, was another concern. While many environments were naturally quieter than the urban spaces of today, noise was still managed. In some cultures, wind chimes were used outside sleeping areas to mark the presence of movement, not for music, but for alertness. In other cases, heavy curtains or animal hides were used to muffle sound. In desert regions, sandbags or woven mats were placed against tent walls to block wind. In wooden houses, straw was stuffed between floorboards to reduce creaking. The goal was not silence in the absolute sense, but quietude, a kind of auditory softness that allowed the mind to settle. In the traditions of East Asia, specific tools were created for dream awareness. In Taoist temples, special dream journals were made from fine paper, kept beside the sleeping mat, and consulted each morning. A brush and inkstone might be left nearby, encouraging the sleeper to record what was seen before it faded. In some Buddhist monasteries, wooden pillows were believed to encourage light sleep, not for comfort, but for mental clarity. These tools were part of a philosophy that treated sleep as an extension of a practice rather than escape. Clocks, in the mechanical sense, did not yet govern the night. Instead, people measured time by natural cues, the position of stars, the changing temperature of wind, the sounds of animals. In China, water clocks marked time in imperial settings. In Rome, sundials told only the time of day. At night, time was sensed more than seen. People awoke when the body stirred, when a child cried, when the fire burned low. This loose relation to time meant that sleep was not always continuous. In many regions, segmented sleep was common. People slept for several hours, woke briefly, and returned to rest again. These intervals were filled with silence, prayer, or the simple act of lying still. The tools of the night accommodated this rhythm. a lamp left half-filled, a cloak draped over the shoulders, a soft space preserved in the bedding. Even tools of writing, simple as they were, played a role in the rituals of sleep. In literate households, a clay tablet, wax board, or scroll might be kept near the bed to record dreams, worries, or reflections. These were not always profound. A note about food, a reminder for a task, a line of verse. But the presence of these items allowed thought to be placed outside the self, a quiet form of closure before letting the mind release its grip. Containers, too, had a place in the nighttime world. Small wooden boxes or ceramic jars held the objects of night, rings removed from fingers, earrings from ears, hairpins, combs, prayer beads. To remove these items and place them into the same box each night was not only about tidiness, it was a rhythm, a gesture, a way of reminding the self that waking life could be set aside. These containers, worn with time, grew familiar. Their touch, their scent, the soft creak of a wooden lid, all signaled that night had returned, and the world could be released for a time. And so the tools of sleep, whether simple or ornate, whether practical or spiritual, helped shape the experience of the night. They did not demand attention, they did not speak, but their presence offered the mind a place to rest, and the body a familiar path to follow. Through repetition, they became quiet companions. Through use, they became part of sleep itself. Now, as we move onward, gently and without strain, we turn to the patterns of movement, how ancient people traveled, how sleep occurred during journeys, and how the night unfolded when far from home, beneath open skies or within unfamiliar walls. When night falls far from home, beneath unfamiliar skies, and the path behind is longer than the one ahead, the experience of sleep changes. It becomes a negotiation with the elements, with distance, and with time. For the ancient traveler, whether merchant, soldier, pilgrim, or messenger, sleep did not wait for convenience. It came when and where it could, beneath cloth, under stars, beside fires, or upon rocking boats, across deserts and mountains. Sleep was a companion that traveled not on demand, but on necessity. It was found between moments, during pauses, or stolen quietly in the stillness between motion. While the tools of sleep at home were predictable, known spaces, known objects, the sleep of the road was shaped by adaptation, by proximity to others, and by the endurance of the body. In the deserts of the Near East and North Africa, long trade caravans moved steadily along ancient paths. Camels carried goods, spices, salt, incense, textiles, while merchants and their attendants walked alongside. These routes, such as the famed incense route or the Silk Road's western reaches, extended for hundreds of miles. Each night, travelers halted to rest. Camps were formed in crescent shapes, animals tethered, fires kindled, tents were unrolled, but many simply laid their bedding on the sand, finding the softest place they could. Mats woven from palm or reeds were placed beneath, and blankets or cloaks were pulled tightly around the body to shield against the sharp drop in the temperature that followed sunset. In such regions, the heat of the day gave way to the chill of night with no warning. Sleep was taken in layers, wool against the cold, leather against the wind, faces wrapped in cloth to guard against sand. Stories from ancient Nabatean travelers describe the sharing of blankets as a communal act. The closeness of bodies preserved warmth. There was no question of privacy. Sleep was a collective necessity. Watches were kept in shifts. One person always remained awake to tend the fire, watch the animals, and guard against thieves or wild creatures. The presence of firelight became a visual anchor, its low glow offering a sense of security, even in vast, open spaces. Lamps were too delicate and fixed for travel, but torches and glowing embers served to light short distances and provide heat for cooking. After a simple meal, people spoke little. Voices grew low, and then gradually sleep spread across the circle, not all at once, but in a ripple. One figure reclining, another adjusting the folds of their garment, another curling beside a pack animal, resting a head upon a saddlebag. In mountainous regions such as those crossed by early Andean herders or Himalayan traders, sleep became a response to altitude and fatigue. Paths were steep and winding, carved into rock or shaped by river erosion. Pack animals such as llamas or yaks carried cargo, while people moved in slow processions. When night came, travelers stopped near water or sheltered slopes. Flat ground was rare, and so rest was taken wherever footing allowed. A shallow alcove, the base of a cliff, or a hollow beneath a ridge. Woolen blankets were essential, often carried in rolled bundles tied with leather straps. The thinner the air, the more effort required simply to breathe. Sleep became shallower, interrupted by the need to adjust posture or respond to sudden gusts of wind. Firewood was scarce, and so dung or dried grasses were burned. A small fire was sufficient. It gave not only heat, but a sense of placement, a reminder that even here, among rocks and cold sky, there was still shelter. In seafaring cultures, the conditions of sleep were even less stable. The Phoenicians, Greeks, and later the Romans traveled by ships made of timber and rope, subject to the movements of wind and wave. Most ships lacked formal cabins. Sailors and rowers slept in shifts, resting on the deck between duties, using coiled ropes or folded cloaks as pillows. The creak of wood, the slap of water against the hull, and the cry of seabirds became the soundtrack of sleep. There was no softness, only necessity. Slaves aboard triremes and galleys slept in cramped spaces, if at all, their rest dictated by the rhythm of command. For merchants or passengers, if cabins were available, they were small and airless. A mat laid over planks, a blanket across the shoulders, and a small lamp secured to a hook. These were the limits of comfort. Seasickness added further complication. Some chewed herbs to settle the stomach. Others focused on steady breathing, hoping sleep would arrive despite motion. In river civilizations, such as ancient Egypt or the Indus Valley, travel often occurred along water. Boats provided smoother passage than overland routes. Wooden barges and reed vessels drifted along currents, guided by poles or sails. On longer trips, travelers created temporary shelters on the deck, using fabric screens or wooden partitions. The Nile, in particular, was treated with reverence, and travel upon it was both sacred and practical. At night, boats were moored along the bank, fires were lit, and meals prepared. Afterward, people lay beneath stars or within narrow canopies. Mosquitoes and other insects were a constant problem. Smoke from the fire helped deter them, as did oils applied to the skin. Nets of fine weave draped from the boat's structure offered additional protection. Sleep came slowly, broken by the sounds of water, the shifting of reeds, or the murmur of animals along the shore. On land routes such as the Persian Royal Road or the later Roman roads, inns and way stations provided moments of structured rest. These facilities, known in Rome as mansiones, were spaced along key routes to offer shelter, food, and stables. Sleeping quarters were often shared. Rooms were sparse, stone floors, straw mats, a fireplace if fortunate. In the East, caravanserais served a similar role. These were large walled compounds with central courtyards, providing safety for traders, animals, and goods. Travelers might find a corner to unroll bedding or rent a wooden platform for the night. Noise was constant, the braying of animals, the clatter of boots, the murmur of conversation. Yet within these shared spaces, routines formed. Sleep occurred early, as darkness offered little else. Candles were used sparingly, and most slept beneath woolen cloaks or wrapped themselves in woven blankets brought from home. The feeling of ground beneath the back, the knowledge that others were near, these gave sleep its shape, even if it arrived in short bursts rather than long hours. Among military groups on campaign, sleep was governed by discipline and strategy. Roman legions established structured camps at the end of each day's march. These encampments were laid out in precise grids, with tents for soldiers, officers, and supplies. Tents made from leather or canvas were erected in rows, and each unit had designated responsibilities for cooking, cleaning, and guard duty. Sleep was taken in shifts. Watches rotated through the night. Each tent housed multiple men, lying close for warmth. Beds consisted of simple mats, straw, or folded cloaks. Armor was kept nearby. Weapons were never far. There was no ceremony to rest. It came when permitted, and it was often light. The mind remained alert even in slumber, trained to wake at sound or command. In the quieter parts of the empire, garrisons stationed in forts adopted more stable routines, and sleep returned to something closer to domestic rhythm. Yet even there, vigilance was woven into the fabric of rest. For pilgrims and religious travelers, sleep became a ritual in itself. Across ancient India, Buddhists and Jains journeyed to sacred sites. In Greece, people traveled to Eleusis or Delphi. In the Islamic world, pilgrims moved toward Mecca. These journeys were long, and sleeping arrangements varied. Inns, temples, or simply the ground beside a road. Often pilgrims slept communally, sharing food and stories. They recited prayers before rest, placed symbols near their heads, and trusted the protection of the divine. The fatigue of travel made sleep easier. Pain in the feet, sun on the face, the weight of the body after miles walked. All these brought drowsiness quickly. Even discomfort, when shared among others, lost some of its edge. To sleep as a pilgrim was to surrender, not just to tiredness, but to belief. In colder regions, such as the northern frontiers of Europe or the highlands of Asia, sleep during travel was more about survival. Snow was both insulation and threat. Travelers dug shallow trenches or used sleds as windbreaks. They wrapped themselves in furs, huddled close to fires, and shared body heat. Sleep was intermittent, watched, and often brief. Fires were fed through the night. When traveling with dogs or horses, animals were brought near for warmth. Dreams, if they came, were rarely remembered. The focus remained on preservation, warmth, rest, movement. Among nomadic groups, the line between travel and home was blurred. The yurt, teepee, or tent was both residence and vehicle. These structures were designed to be disassembled, moved, and rebuilt. Sleep occurred within them as it would in a fixed dwelling, on mats, on hides, beneath blankets of wool or felt. Yet the rhythm of movement shaped everything. The ground changed, the wind changed, but the tools remained constant. A wooden pillow, a familiar robe, a pouch of herbs, these offered continuity. Children learned to sleep to the sound of packing and unpacking, of hoofbeats and whispered decisions. In all of these settings, whether in desert wind or mountain fog, on shifting sea or forest path, the human need for rest remained unchanged. Sleep was not always comfortable. It was rarely private, but it was always sought. The tools were simple, the spaces varied, yet the body, shaped by rhythm, still yielded to night. And in that surrender, travelers found a kind of peace, temporary, imperfect, but real. Now, as we move beyond journeys and return to questions of mortality and memory, we begin to consider how ancient people viewed sleep not only as a daily pause, but as a metaphor for death, and how this view shaped their burial practices, myths, and understandings of the afterlife. Sleep, in the minds of many ancient people, was more than a nightly act. It was a passage, a drift into another condition, and death, as the final stillness, was not altogether different from this nightly disappearance. Across cultures, the line between sleep and death was blurred, not only in language, but in belief, in ritual, and in art. People saw in the sleeping body a likeness to the deceased. Eyes closed, breath slowed, motion ceased, and in this likeness, they found metaphors. They found comfort. They found questions. Death, they imagined, was a longer kind of sleep, sleep without waking. And if dreams came during rest, perhaps visions too came after death. Among the ancient Egyptians, the transition between sleep and death was deeply symbolic. They believed that sleep mimicked death in its stillness, but was different in that the soul, the Ba, would return upon waking. In death, however, the soul departed fully, beginning its journey through the underworld. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and instructions, guided the soul through this passage. Tombs were constructed as eternal sleeping places. Bodies were embalmed not only to preserve them, but to prepare them for what came after. The dead were often depicted reclining, as if asleep, their hands crossed, faces calm. Amulets were placed on their chests. Much like a mother might place a protective charm near a sleeping child, the tomb, filled with food, furniture, and symbolic goods, was a chamber of waiting. The eternal night was made bearable by preparation, by ritual, and by the belief that the sleeper, though dead, was not abandoned. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians and Babylonians also drew parallels between sleep and death. Their underworld, known as Kur, was a dark and silent place. The dead were believed to exist in a shadowy version of the living world, eating dust and drinking bitter water. Sleep was not feared, but death was approached with caution. Funerary rituals aimed to ensure the spirit would not wander. Offerings were made to appease restless souls. If a person died without burial, or if proper rites were not performed, they might become a ghost, lingering between worlds, disturbing the dreams of the living. Dreams, in this view, became a thin place, a point of contact. The dead might appear in dreams not as memories, but as presences. The dreamer, upon waking, was expected to respond, to leave food, to offer words, to acknowledge the visit. The Greeks developed a more philosophical understanding of the connection between sleep and death. In myth, Hypnos was the god of sleep, and Thanatos, his twin, was the god of death. They were imagined as quiet figures, gentle, winged, not cruel. Sleep was the brother of death, they said, and both arrived silently. In Homeric texts, death was often described as sleep. Warriors fell in battle and were said to rest forever. The language softened loss, giving it a gentler shape. In temples, statues of the dead showed them reclining, eyes closed, hands folded. Their posture was not one of fear, but of rest. Philosophers such as Plato wrote of death as a release, a kind of awakening from the illusion of life. Others, like Epicurus, saw death as a return to nothingness, no different than dreamless sleep. Yet across all these views, the parallel remained: the stillness of the body, the departure of consciousness. These were shared features, making sleep a nightly rehearsal for the unknown. In Roman times, these ideas were carried forward. Tombstones often bore inscriptions such as "Dormit in pace, he sleeps in peace." Funerary art showed the dead as if lying on couches, dressed in robes, heads resting on pillows. Burial chambers were painted with stars and moons, evoking a kind of eternal night. For many, death was not a horror, but a transition, not a punishment, but a rest. The afterlife, as described by Virgil and other poets, was a land of fields and rivers, of wandering souls who retained memory and shape. Sleep in this world became a bridge, not only between day and night, but between life and what came after. In ancient India, Vedic and later Hindu traditions described death as the soul's departure from the body, much like the nightly departure in dreams. The Upanishads compared the dream state to a kind of traveling, a movement beyond the senses. When a person died, the Atman, or soul, left permanently, moving toward another birth or toward liberation. Sleep was one of the four states of being: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and turiya, a fourth, unchanging state beyond all others. In this system, sleep was not only a rest but a spiritual mirror. The calmness of deep sleep, where the ego dissolves and thought ceases, was considered closest to pure being. Death, then, was not feared, but observed with reverence. Cremation rituals, mantras, and offerings guided the soul on its next path. The body, like a used garment, was discarded. The soul moved onward, and sleep, nightly and undramatic, reminded people of this truth. In Buddhism, particularly in early Indian and later East Asian schools, sleep and death were also compared. Monks practiced meditative awareness during sleep, observing dreams as manifestations of the mind. Death, likewise, was treated as a process, not an end. The Tibetan Book of the Dead described the bardo, an intermediate state between death and rebirth, where visions appeared much like dreams. To prepare for death, one practiced letting go of thought, of attachment, of fear. Sleep offered daily practice. Monks often slept sitting upright to reduce attachment to comfort. They used hard pillows, small mats. They recited verses before and after sleep, reminding themselves of impermanence. In this view, death was not to be resisted, it was to be understood. And sleep, again, became teacher. Among the Chinese, especially within Taoist and Confucian traditions, Death was seen as a return, not disappearance. Ancestors were honored as continued members of the family. Sleep was seen as a lesser version of this return, a temporary stillness. Dreams were viewed as potential visitations. During the Ghost Festival, the boundaries between worlds were thought to thin. Offerings were made, candles lit, people slept lightly. The dead, it was believed, might return for a moment, not in fear but in longing. Burials were performed with care, coffins aligned with geomantic principles, tombs shaped to guide energy. Death was not separation, it was relocation. And sleep, as nightly descent into stillness, reminded people that life moved in circles, not lines. In Mesoamerican cultures such as the Maya and Aztec civilizations, death was complex and layered. The Maya believed in multiple underworlds, each with its own challenges. Death was a journey, requiring strength, preparation, and guidance. Sleep, for them, was not passive. It was another world, with its own logic. Dreams were decoded by priests. Visions of ancestors, animals, or symbols were taken seriously. The body of the dead was prepared with objects, food, and ritual. It was laid to rest with the head to the east, facing the rising sun. Sleep, in this arrangement, echoed death not just in stillness, but in direction. Night followed day, as death followed life. And just as morning followed sleep, so too might rebirth follow passing. In indigenous cultures of North America, many tribes viewed death as a return to the spirit world. The Ojibwe believed that the soul journeyed along a path marked by trials and guardians. Sleep, especially dream sleep, was seen as a way to glimpse that path. The dream catcher, woven and hung above the sleeper, filtered visions, allowing only safe dreams to pass through. Children were taught to observe their dreams, to speak of them with elders. When someone died, songs were sung to guide their spirit. Personal items were buried with them. The body was treated gently, much like a sleeping child. Fires were lit to comfort the soul as it traveled. The night was respected. The sleep of the dead was watched over. In the Islamic tradition, sleep is explicitly described as a kind of death. The Quran says that God takes the souls of the dead and of those who sleep, returning the latter upon waking. Dreams, especially those of the prophets, are seen as messages from the divine. The Prophet Muhammad spoke of true dreams as 146th part of prophecy. When a Muslim dies, they are washed, shrouded, and buried with care, as if being tucked into a final sleep. Prayers are offered. The body is placed on its right side, facing Mecca. The grave is simple, humble, and intended to decompose naturally. Sleep in life is considered a mercy, a pause in striving, and death is understood as the longer pause before the next awakening. In Jewish tradition, the connection between sleep and death is also acknowledged. Daily prayers include thanks for waking, a return of the soul. The nighttime prayer known as the Shema is recited before sleep, affirming faith in the unity of God, as if it might be the last prayer. The dead are buried swiftly, treated with dignity. Stones are placed on graves as signs of remembrance. The metaphor of sleep softens grief, making death seem familiar, cyclical. Psalms describe death as lying down in peace. The soul, it is said, returns to God, who watches over both the waking and the resting. In Christian traditions, sleep and death are often linked in scripture and ritual. Jesus refers to the dead as those who sleep. Early Christians referred to burial grounds as cemeteries, from the Greek word for sleeping places. The dead were laid to rest in catacombs with inscriptions that spoke of peace, waiting, and eventual resurrection. Sleep served as a symbol of trust that life would return, that morning would come. Even now, prayers before sleep invoke protection through the night, as if one might not wake. Yet if one did, it was seen as grace. Across all these traditions, so varied, so distant, the same quiet idea lingers, that to sleep is to surrender, to trust in something unseen, and that death, though permanent, is not foreign. It is known in the body each night. It is practiced gently, without knowing. And so when people built tombs, recited prayers, or laid their loved ones down, they thought not of endings, but of continuities, of night, of rest, of long, dreamless quiet. As we approach the end of this quiet journey, we now turn to what remains, the legacy of ancient sleep, and the small, curious facts that have drifted through time, practices that vanished, beliefs that lingered, and the forgotten echoes of rest, preserved in artifact and memory. As the centuries moved onward, as empires fell and new worlds took shape, the ancient ways of sleeping did not vanish all at once. They softened, drifted, changed shape. Some traditions lingered in quiet corners of daily life, others faded entirely, known now only through ruins, worn pages, or the silent study of objects found in soil. And yet, the imprint of ancient sleep remains, subtle, partial, but persistent, in how we speak, how we rest, how we imagine the night, in the routines we still follow, even without knowing why. These remnants, scattered across history, are small but steady, like the quiet footprints of people long asleep. One of the more curious legacies lies in language. Across many modern languages, words for sleep and death remain linked. In Latin, dormir means to sleep, and dormitio was used for the sleep of death. In modern Romance languages, Spanish, Italian, French, similar patterns remain. Phrases like rest in peace originate from ancient epitaphs, where the dead were described not as gone, but as resting. In English, expressions like eternal rest, sleeping peacefully, or put to rest carry traces of this view. Even in informal language, when someone dies, it is often said that they have gone to sleep. These linguistic habits are more than metaphor. They reflect a long-standing comfort with comparing sleep to the final stillness, a habit born of centuries when death was daily and sleep was sacred. In the design of sleeping furniture, echoes of ancient styles still appear. The raised platform bed, now common around the world, was once a sign of status in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Early beds were elevated not for comfort, but to avoid pests, snakes, and drafts. Over time, this functional design became associated with wealth and refinement. In Rome, beds were adorned with metal or ivory, much like modern headboards. Today's cushions, pillows, and quilts are modern in material, but their arrangement, a body stretched out, head slightly raised, covered from foot to shoulder, mirrors patterns seen in the tomb paintings and sculpture from thousands of years ago. The basic shape of rest has not changed. It still centers the body in repose, eyes closed, breath slowed. The use of herbal aids for sleep also has deep roots. Lavender, now common in sleep sprays and teas, was used by the Romans to scent bedding. Chamomile, with its mild sedative effects, was brewed in ancient Egypt and used in healing temples. Valerian root, known for calming properties, was prescribed in Greek medicine. Today, these herbs continue to appear in nighttime routines, not necessarily as ritual, but as habit. Their lineage stretches back quietly. The knowledge passed not always through books, but through repetition. What was once applied by hand is now found in packaged form, but the purpose remains unchanged: to invite sleep gently, to make the passage into night a little smoother. Some ancient sleep practices have become curiosities. Segmented sleep, once the norm in pre-industrial societies, is now rarely discussed outside academic texts. Historical evidence from Europe, Asia, and Africa describes people sleeping in two phases: an early sleep after dusk, followed by a wakeful period, and then a second sleep until dawn. During the interval, people prayed, thought, talked, or tended small tasks. This pattern, known as first sleep and second sleep, was widespread. It was referenced in diaries, medical texts, and even legal records. But with the arrival of artificial light, particularly gas and electric lamps, the night changed. Sleep became consolidated. The expectation of a single, unbroken stretch replaced older rhythms. And so, segmented sleep quietly disappeared, not with fanfare but with light. Other customs vanished more abruptly. The placing of protective charms near the bed, common in households from Mesopotamia to medieval Europe, faded as beliefs shifted. Amulets shaped like hands, eyes, or animals were once kept under pillows or hung from headboards. They were believed to ward off nightmares, spirits, or disease. As scientific understanding of sleep grew, such practices were dismissed as superstition. Yet their purpose, to comfort, to soothe, still echoes in the placement of familiar objects near the bed. A book, a lamp, a photo. The instinct remains to surround the self with safety, however it is defined. The night sky, once central to sleep rituals, has largely disappeared from modern experience. In ancient times, stars were not only beautiful, but functional. Their patterns marked time, season, and story. In Greece and Rome, certain constellations were associated with sleep. In Egypt, the rising of Sirius signaled important transitions. For nomadic people, the stars provided direction and familiarity, a ceiling that remained constant even when the ground did not. Now, with urban light pollution, most people sleep without seeing stars. The sky has become a hidden presence. Yet in rural areas and in moments of stillness, people still find comfort in starlight, a primal familiarity that connects them to countless sleepers before them. Sleep temples once found in Egypt and Greece are long gone. These were places where people sought healing through rest, dreams, and quiet. Priests would interpret dreams, administer herbs, and guide rituals. The idea that sleep could be sacred, that it could reveal truth or restore health, has been replaced by clinical models. Yet the search for better sleep continues. Modern sleep clinics study patterns, test machines, measure brainwaves. The goal remains the same: to understand rest, to recover it. In this way, the impulse to protect and honor sleep remains, though its expression has changed. Artifacts related to ancient sleep are rarely the focus of museums. They are often small: a stone pillow, a worn mat, a carved charm. They sit in corners behind glass, unremarkable beside gold or weaponry. Yet they are deeply personal, touched by hands, shaped by routine. They carry the weight of repetition: an oil lamp with blackened rim, a linen sheet with faded embroidery. These objects remind us that the ancients were not distant. They lay down at night. They closed their eyes. They waited for sleep, just as we do. In burial sites, the sleeping posture is common. Bodies arranged on their side, knees bent, arms folded. Archaeologists often interpret this as symbolic of rest, a return to the fetal position, a gesture of peace. Some graves include pillows of stone or clay. Others show heads propped on folded arms. These details, though minor, suggest that the metaphor of sleep was not merely poetic. It was enacted physically, even in death. The sleeper, buried with care, was imagined as someone continuing a journey. In some cultures, lullabies preserved the language of ancient sleep. Songs sung to children in Sumerian, Sanskrit, Greek contained rhythms and phrases meant to soothe. They spoke of the moon, of silence, of animals sleeping. These melodies, passed through generations, carried with them beliefs about rest. Even today, lullabies often include imagery of stars, darkness, and angels. The tone is always slow. The message is always one of safety. In this way, the ancient desire to cradle sleep in words continues. Sleep has also left its mark in architecture: the placement of windows, the shape of inner chambers, the thickness of walls. All were designed with rest in mind. Roman villas positioned bedrooms on the east to catch morning light. In Islamic architecture, courtyards provided cool, quiet interiors. In Japan, paper walls allowed soft light to filter in, creating a tranquil sleep space. These decisions were practical, but they also reflected a philosophy that sleep was not only an end to activity, but a necessary counterbalance, that shelter must support both waking and resting. Some beliefs about sleep faded because they became unnecessary. In past times, sleep was vulnerable. Wild animals, theft, weather, all posed threats. Tools of protection like bolted doors or nighttime guards were essential. Today, with insulated homes and locked doors, these fears have lessened, but the memory of vulnerability remains in the way people check windows, pull curtains, or turn on a small light before bed. These gestures, inherited without instruction, are residues of older times, survival patterns carried forward in quiet habit. In rare moments, ancient sleep traditions resurface in deliberate practice. Some people return to segmented sleep, waking in the night to read or write. Others adopt sleep rituals inspired by history: oil massages, herbal baths, or periods of silent reflection before rest. These are not widespread, but they reflect a growing curiosity, a desire to reconnect with rhythms that felt less rushed, more humane. In a world shaped by clocks and screens, the slow, deliberate sleep of the past seems strangely appealing. The knowledge of ancient sleep continues to grow. Researchers examine tombs, analyze DNA from bedding, study soot on lamp rims. Every new discovery adds a small piece to the picture. A better understanding of how people slept helps us see them more clearly, not as statues or names, but as humans with tired bodies, anxious thoughts, and nightly routines. They too waited for the mind to slow. They too blinked at the ceiling, listening for distant sounds. In this recognition, the past becomes less remote. It becomes familiar, shared. And so, even as technologies change, as cities rise, as time moves forward, the core needs remain. The need for safety, the need for stillness, the need to close the eyes and drift, if only for a few hours, into a state beyond thought. The legacy of ancient sleep is not monumental. It is not carved in stone. It is felt in the quiet moments, in the way the bed is made, in the way the body curls, in the silence before dawn. As this journey nears its end, we now turn to the final reflections, soft thoughts, gentle farewell, and a quiet closing to this long, slow exploration of sleep across time. In the stillness of the present moment, we begin to drift away from the long path we've followed, a path that has taken us through chambers and tents, across mountain passes and temple courtyards, onto boats and into tombs. We have moved slowly, quietly, and without urgency. And now we rest here, not to conclude, but simply to pause, to let what we've heard settle like dust in an undisturbed room, to allow the mind to grow soft, like sand pressed smooth by time. The story of how ancient people slept is not grand or heroic. It does not thunder with battles or dazzle with kings. It does not rise like towers or echo like songs. It is a small story, a human story, made of routines, of habits, of the nightly surrender shared by all. Across empires and ruins, across centuries and rivers, it remains unchanged in one simple truth. Every life must rest, every day must end, and everybody, no matter how mighty or humble, must lie down and close its eyes. This is the part of history often forgotten, not because it is hidden, but because it is quiet. There are no monuments to sleep, no annals of dreaming, but it is there, in the margins, in the fold of a blanket carved in stone, in the angle of a figure in a mural, in the soot from a long cold lamp. It is in the stories passed from mother to child, whispered before nightfall. It is in the worn surface of a stone pillow, in the threadbare edge of a funeral shroud. History has many voices. Sleep speaks in none of them, and yet it is always present. We have seen how people prepared their spaces, how they chose where and how to lie down, how they responded to cold, to heat, to wind, how they made comfort from what was available: a reed mat, a folded cloak, a wall to lean against, a roof that did not leak. The tools were simple, but the meaning was the same: to end the day in peace, to soften the body, to quiet the mind, to let time pass without participation. We have seen how rituals shaped sleep: the washing of feet, the lighting of a lamp, the offering of prayers. These were not complex acts, but they gave form to stillness. They signaled the shift from doing to resting. They marked the border between daylight and dream. Even now in modern routines, brushing teeth, closing curtains, dimming lights, we echo those rituals. They tell the body what to expect. They remind the mind to let go. They are inherited shapes of stillness, carried quietly from the past. We have seen how beliefs gave meaning to sleep, how people imagined it as a bridge, a rehearsal, a meeting place, how they understood dreams not as noise, but as messages, how they viewed the night not as emptiness, but as a time with its own purpose. These beliefs varied, yet they shared something tender: the idea that what happens in sleep is not meaningless, that it is a space of its own, and whether one sees it as a passage to the spirit world, or a conversation with the self, or a mirror held up to waking life, it is always something more than silence. We have followed travelers as they sought sleep, far from home, as they lay beneath stars or beside fires, as they curled against pack animals or leaned into stone walls. Their sleep was not always peaceful. It was often brief, yet it was always necessary. The journey paused, the body found pause, and even in unfamiliar places, sleep still came. Even now, when we sleep in hotels or shelters, there's a soft echo of those ancient rests, the human body searching for comfort in the midst of motion. We have entered tombs and spoken softly of death. We have heard how the sleeping posture shaped burial, how rest was imagined to continue, unbroken, after the final breath. These were not beliefs of despair, they were arrangements of care, to bury someone as if sleeping is to say they mattered, not in achievement, but in presence, that their final posture should be one of ease, that even in endings there should be peace. And we have lingered in the forgotten details, in the legacy of herbs, of lullabies, of amulets, in the old rhythms of two-part sleep, in the shapes of beds, in the tilt of windows, in the thickness of walls, in the gestures passed through time, placing a light near the bed, turning toward a cooler side, adjusting a fold of cloth. These are not grand traditions. They are small, repeated motions, and in them, history continues quietly, without announcement. Now, as this journey draws to its last few moments, you may notice your own body growing heavy. Perhaps your limbs have stilled, your breath, once active, now quiet. Perhaps your eyes are already closed, or blinking slower, or not focused at all. This is not the end of thought, but its gentle suspension, not sleep forced, but sleep allowed. There is no need to remember what was said, no need to follow each word. Let them pass like a soft wind through curtains. Let them settle where they may. If they leave no trace, that is fine. If they form shapes in your mind, let them fade. There is nothing required of you now. You are not asked to learn, or to remember, or to respond, only to rest. Tonight, as you lie down, whether in a room filled with sound or one wrapped in silence, know that your need to sleep is ancient, that your act of closing your eyes is shared by millions before you, that your breath, steady and unnoticed, joins the same rhythm that has carried all people through night and into day. You are part of that rhythm. You are safe within it. If you dream, may they be gentle. If you rest without dreams, may that rest be full. If you wake, may it be slowly, without rush. And if you do not hear the end of these words, that too is well. From ancient afterglow, thank you for spending this time here, for listening, for allowing this quiet history to keep you company. May the night hold you softly. May sleep come easily.